Alright, welcome back guys. Man, does it feel good to be back, and man, does it feel good to see all of your smiling faces, because I know you guys are excited for this video that we've been talking about for a long time on this channel. It's something that we posted as a poll over the last couple weeks so that we could let you guys vote on the first video you wanted to see as we came back to YouTube. And this one kind of blew everything else out of the water. So we definitely wanted to come back with an absolute hit for you guys and talk about a highly requested topic that there's kind of a lot of different ideas and concepts about. And today we're going to be talking about dyeing soles. So obviously, as you guys know, not all soles are created equal. So you can't treat every single one of them the same. Today, what we're going to be working on is a pair of the Jordan 11s. We already have them decked out with this cool Cubs theme on the upper, but what's really going to set these off is by adding a red outsole to these. And since the Jordan 11s have a translucent outsole, the way that we're going to go about switching these up is by actually dyeing them. So here's a quick look at what the final product of these looks like. You could see that we have the outsole completely decked out and a really cool red that really sets these off. And if you look at them from the side, the red only takes up maybe 10 to 15% of the entire thing, the color scheme, the color palette, but it really sets these off and ties these together. And as you guys could see from the earlier stages before we dyed the soles, this really sets them off and goes a long way. Now, there's a lot of other soles out there that we can't necessarily do the same if we were working with something like a Dunk. These have all rubber outsoles. So let's say this Cali Dunk High started off as all white and you wanted to somehow change the outsole and the midsole to green on the midsole, red on the outsole. I don't have a perfect way to do it. You'll see some people with a few videos out there of a few different ways of going about it and trying to make it last. I've tried everything out there and nothing really lasts that well, so I can't recommend to you guys anything. There's a few things that you can do to prolong it, such as some scratch resistant protecting coats. Raleigh Restorations makes a absolutely phenomenal one. It's the best one I've used, but for long-term durability, it's still not really going to do the job on something like a Dunk outsole. But if we're working with something like a Roche outsole and midsole, I've had a little bit better luck. So you can't really get the bottoms to hold over time, but I've had this pair. This is my personal pair of the Bel Airs that we did, oh boy, 2.5 years ago. So I've been wearing these since then. We're going to go ahead and show you guys some close-ups on these, and these have held up absolutely great. Even if we do some scratch test, that doesn't necessarily hold true to how they're going to hold out in the real world as far as what happens when there's stress and friction and your foot being placed in there and taking it through these different movement patterns. It's not the same as just holding up through a scratch test. There's nothing like really wearing them in a true wear test, but I've had a little bit more luck with Roche outsoles than I've ever had with something like a rubberized Dunk outsole. So, but back to today's video, we're going to go ahead and talk to you guys how you can go about dyeing some translucent outsoles. So there's quite a few different products out there that you could use to get the job done with these. There's a lot of different sole dyes out there. If you just put these in through a simple Google search, you'll come up with some really popular results from FBCC. He has a lot of great options. I've used some of his before. Dark Knight Sole Dye has some really great options, but the one that I've had the best luck with overall, and the reason that I prefer them is because they have the most color options. I can mix and match colors. I can kind of combine colors, dilute them to lighten them up. I like to use a combination of Angelus leather dye mixed in with some Angelus Sole Bright. And so the Sole Bright is used by restorers to kind of restore the outsoles that turn yellow over time back to a little bit more of an icy color. But what it really does with the dye is it just helps it seep in there even more and just really get into this sole. And if you just tried painting the outsole without the Sole Bright, it's just not going to seep in as well. It's just going to kind of sit more on top of the whole thing. Whereas what you really want to happen with dye is for it to just really soak right in there, kind of burn itself in there to where even if you rub your finger over it, it's kind of underneath the top layer. But if you just threw dye on top, it's going to kind of not sit on there as evenly, and as soon as you come in contact with anything, whether it's your finger or the ground, a lot of that dye is going to come off. So this Sole Bright is an absolute must-have, super important step for really getting the dye to seep in there even a little bit more. So as far as ratios go, we're going to be using a 1-to-1 ratio of our leather dye color mixed in with our Sole Bright. And the Sole Bright has a little bit more of a cream rinse type texture, so when you mix that in with the dye, you're going to get a little bit more of a thicker mixture overall, so don't be afraid of that. It's still going to work the same as dye. Okay, so a quick little added bonus tip: if you're mixing leather dye colors, you can absolutely do that like I mentioned earlier in the video. But if you just want to lighten the color overall, all you need to do is mix in some of the Angelus neutral leather dye. Now, the neutral doesn't have any color to it, but overall it will lighten up the color of whatever you're already originally using. So another little cautionary tip is to just be really careful also how you're holding these shoes. Whether maybe you're holding them up against your chest or you have them up against whatever surface, you just need to remember that we have wet dye. Even if you've been working on them for a couple hours, the dye can still get transferred onto other surfaces. Make sure you don't have the shoes too close to one another to where the outsole might be touching some other part of the shoe on the other. You just really need to be careful with these. Keep them separate and make sure you're kind of paying attention to all these dyed surfaces and where they're touching. So now that we're just about ready to go ahead and get started with our dye mixture, I just want to give you guys a little bit of a quick warning that this dye is absolutely very permanent if you get it on different types of things. You can get it off your hands or anything, but I still suggest you wear gloves. But if you get it on certain parts of the shoe that you did not want it to go on, such as this Jordan 11 that we're working on, we're going to keep this midsole white and the patent leather white. If I were to get any of the dye on there, we are in some serious trouble. So you need to be really careful. Make sure that you have a clean work area. Make sure you don't work on any type of tabletop or anything that you don't want to get any of the dye on. Make sure you have some craft paper laid down, an old rag towel, something. But the way that I like to go about attacking this is by starting everything off with a very tiny detailed brush and going ahead and laying down an outline around everything first. So you might be wondering, where is the tape and why are you not covering up the midsole or anything like that? And when it comes to working with dye, to tell you the truth, I just don't trust the tape. I'd rather trust my own hand and be able to see everything, whereas if we lay down tape, you kind of can't see if you got anything underneath there. So you really need to just take your time with the detail brush. And another little thing when going around with the brush, whether it be your tiny detailed brush or when we move on to a bigger brush for some more coverage, you really need to be careful with this Jordan 11 outsole because it has these kind of bumps and levels to it that you don't want the brush flickering over it, because what can happen is dye can go flicking onto different surfaces that you don't want it to go on. So overall, you just really need to take your time and be extremely careful with this dye, because you will cause yourself a lot of headaches if you start getting this dye on some surfaces where it is not meant to go. And I'm going to go ahead and just throw a suggestion out at you guys. If you were to get some of this dye onto an area where it wasn't meant to be, what you could consider doing is incorporating a splatter effect into your design. So let's say I was to get some of this red dye onto this midsole and it wasn't meant to be part of it, but you're not going to be able to get this dye off. Whether you try acetoning it off, it's just going to kind of bleed into the midsole. I wouldn't suggest painting white over on top of the dye. That's not the way to go. So if you have to, as an absolute last resort, a way to think about the dye and the tiny little dots that you may have gotten in different spots, it may be an idea or at least something to consider of possibly adding, maybe some red and blue splatter onto a design like this. But let's hope you don't have to get to that point and cross that bridge. So now that we're all done with our outline with our really tiny detailed brush, we're just going to move into a little bit more of a medium-sized brush just to get some quicker, easier coverage. And then you're just going to treat this dye kind of almost how you would with paint. Make sure that you're spreading it really well, getting into all those little nooks and crannies of the outsole, and just get some really good coverage. So now that we have our first coat of dye done, I recommend a little bit of heat setting just to make sure that that dye really seeps in. But then what you're going to want to do is go ahead and try to acetone off this first layer. And the reason that you're going to want to do that is just to get rid of excess dye. It's not the same as acetoning off paint, where the paint's really going to go away and be totally transferred onto the cotton ball or whatever you're using. I'm just using an old t-shirt rag here, but what's going to happen when we use acetone on top of the dye is it's just going to remove that excess dye that's on that top layer that would be transferred onto your fingertips if you were touching it, or onto the ground if you were walking with these. You really need to just get off all that extra, and it's just going to kind of help even out everything also, just so you have some really nice, clean, even, overall solid color. Then you're going to repeat those same exact steps. We're going to do a second coat of dye, After you're done with that second coat, a little bit of heat setting, and then you're also gonna go ahead and wipe off that top layer with some acetone also. So what I recommend next for you guys after you're done with these steps is to just go ahead and let these shoes sit for a couple days. Go ahead and give them 48 to 72 hours to just go ahead, sit there, let that dye really seep in, and then when we come back around to these, we're gonna do that same last step of wiping off any more of that excess dye. I don't recommend using a cotton ball here. You're just gonna get a lot of that frizz and stuff left behind, so just go ahead and use something like a t-shirt rag or anything along those lines. And I'm gonna show you guys a little quick paper towel test. If we just rub a paper towel right across these or my finger, you'll see that we're not getting any excess dye transferred onto these other surfaces. Alright, so now that we've given these plenty of time to dry and there's no other excess dye being transferred off when we rub our fingers across these are now officially set. I don't believe that you guys need to apply any type of finisher to these, whether it be a finishing spray or any type of Angelus finisher. I don't think you need anything on a dyed outsole. But another little cautionary tale is just kind of be careful what surfaces these are going to be worn on, whether it be by you or your client. I would definitely try to recommend avoiding carpet at all costs, even if there is no excess dye in your opinion, when you apply some of these final tests, but you can never be really too careful, and that would probably not be a good look if your shoes were transferring dye off onto carpet. Alright, there you have it guys, so go ahead, give yourself another pat on the back for lasting it through another one of our long tutorials. I hope you guys learned something from today's video. We talked about a lot of little different tips and tricks throughout the whole video, so I hope you guys didn't go ahead and skip through too much of it because we gave a lot of little cautionary tales of what can happen when you're working with dye. And it's a lot different than when you're working with paint because there's a whole lot less room for error overall because your mistakes will definitely be a little bit more costly in the long run. Alright, so as always, we hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Go ahead and give it a like if you haven't already. Keep sending us those suggestions for other videos and topics you guys would like to see covered. And please, please, please keep sending us those pictures of the great work that you guys are doing. Our DMs are always flooded with new content and new customizers out there who said they found us on YouTube and started following some of our tips and tricks. That's why we do this. It is super awesome to see. So please keep sending us that stuff, guys. We really appreciate it. And we just love seeing it. So thank you guys for sticking with us. I know it has been a little bit of a drought, but it is super happy to be back on YouTube. It's been hard not making any videos, but we have just been absolutely insane trying to keep up with the My Cause, My Cleats. It is crazy how many pairs we've done, and we're happy to be back here. Don't worry, guys. We have more videos coming your way. Please keep sticking with us. All right. Thank you, guys, and we will see you in the next one.